Greetings, mathematicians. Today, our vocabulary that we're going to need to use is decimal. Remember, that is a number that uses a decimal point and place value to show magnitude or size. Remember, we always want to find our decimal point first because that kind of gives us our reference. Our next vocabulary word is digit. Remember, that is a single symbol used to make a number. Remember, the digits are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. When we combine them together and put them in different places, then they come up with a value. We talked about rounding yesterday. Remember, that means replacing a number with an approximate value that is shorter or easier to work with. Sometimes we call it a friendly number. The result, remember, is going to be less accurate but easier to use. Okay? So if we wanted to round 47, it's about $50. It's a lot easier to count by 50s, 50, 100, 150. Okay? If we wanted to think about something that cost $178, that's about $200 if we were going to round it or estimate it. And yesterday we talked about rounding. Today we'll talk about rounding to the nearest whole number. And if we wanted to round 4 78/100ths, we'd round it to 5 if it was the nearest whole number. Some other words that would mean the same thing as rounding. You might hear them say estimate, about how many, that would mean round. What's the closest 10, 20, 30, so on. What's approximately how much? The nearest, the friendly number closest. We tend to round to either the places that end in 0, so the tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, or tenths, hundredths, thousandths, again, because we're a base 10 system. We talked about that little saying, 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, take a rest. Sometimes that can be helpful to remember the rules for round. Okay, so today we're going to deal a ton with place value again. We always want to look for our decimal point. That's our reference. So today we're going to go to the left first. Our first place to the left is our ones. That's going to be really important today because we're talking about rounding to the nearest whole number or the nearest one. Then we have our tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, finally, millions. As we go to the right, the next spot to the right of the decimal is our tenths, our dimes. Then our hundredths, that's our pennies. Thousandths, that would be our slivers of a penny. And then 10,000ths. So small it's getting so hard to even imagine. Our learning target for today is I can round decimals to the nearest thousandth and whole number. So now we're going to pick two different places. Rounding's still going to be the same strategy, just we're going to look at different places that we're rounding to. So yesterday we talked about if we're going to round 82. We talked about that in 2nd and 3rd grade. 82 is between the numbers 80 and 90. If we're going to round to the nearest 10, because that's what the directions say, I have to decide which 10 is closer. Well, I'm only 2 away from 80, so I would round this value to 80. We talked about 15 yesterday. The two 10s that 15 is in between, if I'm counting by tens, it would be in between 10 and 20. 15 is smack dab in the middle. That was the one that we had to memorize the rule for. So tell your partner the rule if you're at school. If you're at home, go ahead and explain what the rule would be to somebody. Remember we said 5 or more was that rule. We're going to raise the score and go up to the next 10. Okay? So again, we could visualize at that 5 or more, it's going to roll down or roll up to that next 10 to 20. If it's a 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0, we're going to stay. Same rule for today. We're just looking at different places. Oops. So let's look at an example from yesterday. Yesterday we talked about rounding to the nearest tenth. So we've got 47/100ths. Stop and think about money, money, money. What do you see? Hopefully you see 4 dimes and 7 pennies, or maybe you see it on the 100 grid. So our first job is going to be decide what 2 tenths is it between. I'm going to move, because I'm going to the nearest tenth, I'm going to mark my 10th spot. I have to decide, am I going to stay at 4 tenths or am I going to round to 5 tenths? To do that, I could either place it on the number line or I could look back at the 7. 47 cents is closer to 50 cents. That would be here. Look at, I'm only 3 more hundredths away from 50 cents. So I would run around to 0 and 5 tenths. This would be the closest tenth. Now, yesterday we also talked about rounding to the nearest hundredth. My first job is to visualize. If I wanted to picture that, I'm going to picture 48 cents and 4 slivers more. I'm going to mark the place I want to round to. It wants to go to the nearest hundredth, so that's the place I need to underline and stop at. So I need to decide, am I going to stay at 48 cents? Am I closer? Or am I closer to 49 cents? Well, halfway in between would be 48.5 cents, or 5 thousandths. Since I'm at 484 thousandths, I'd be one less. I look back at the 4. The 4 says 4 or less. I'm closer to stay. I'm going to round to 0 and 48 hundredths. Again, I need to stop with my 8 because the whole idea is I'm getting an easier number to work with. 48 cents is easier than 48 cents and 4 slivers. So today, we're going to just look at a new place, the thousandth place. So again, if I look over here at my place value, I've got my tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So this is the place we're going to look at, the thousandth place, the third one over. So my first job, round to the thousandths. I'm going to mark my thousandths place first, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. I'm going to stop at my thousandths place. I'm going to underline the digit. I've got a 7, the 7 is in the thousandths place. Now to decide what to do with it though, I have to decide, am I going to stay at a 7 or do I need to go up to 8? To do that, I'm going to look at the value of the digit next to it, to the right. I have an 8. Does an 8 tell me that I want to stay at that 7 or am I closer to go up to an 8? Well, 8, 5 or more, we want to raise the score. I need to leave all the other numbers the same before it because I'm not changing those. I'm still going to be at 24 cents, but then instead of 7 slivers, the 8 tells me to go up to 8 slivers, 248 thousandths. Let's look at the next one. Write it down on your board. Now we're going to round it to the nearest thousandth. My first job is to mark my digit, tenth, hundredth, thousandth. That's the place I'm rounding to, so I'm going to underline it. I have to decide. I'm going to write my first numbers down. Those stay the same. Am I going to stay at 87 and 6 slivers? Or does the 4, if I look back at the 4, does that tell me to round up to 7 slivers? Well, let's see. 4 or less, take a rest. I'm going to stay at the 6 in the thousandths place. So I would round it to 0 and 876 thousandths. Our next number, write it out. It says round to the nearest thousandth again. Here we go. I'm going to come down. Tenth, hundredth, thousandth. My thousandth spot is right here. I'm going to keep my other digits the same, so I'm going to write those out to start with. I still have $4. I still have 8 dimes, 9 pennies. But now I have to decide, do I want to stay with 0 in the thousandths place, or do I round up to 1? To do that, I'm going to look at the back from the target number. What does that 5 tell me? 5 or more tells me to raise the score. So I want to go up. That's that one we had to memorize. 5 is right in the middle. Mathematicians say we round up to the next digit. So I have 4 and 891 thousandths would be my estimate value. Okay, try this one on your own. Write it out. Mark your target number. Underline and look back. And then pause and check your answer with mine. Okay, so my first job, I'm going to the thousandths, not thousands, so tenths, hundredths, thousandths. My target place is where my digit 2 is. This is my thousandths place. But now I need to decide, am I going to stay at that 2 or am I going to round up to the next value? Well, I'm going to look back at the number before it. What does that 9 tell me to do? Am I going to stay at 2 slivers or having 9 in the thousandths place? Does that tell me to, or the 10,000ths place, does that tell me to round up? 5 or more? Yep, 29 would be closer to rounding it to the next digit, which would be 3. So I'm going to keep my first numbers the same. My tenths stay the same, my hundredths stay the same because I'm rounding to the thousandths. but my thousandth is going to now become a 3. So my answer would be 4 and 3 thousandths if I rounded it to the nearest thousandth. So I want you to stop and think now. When we round to the thousandth, what's one thing that you've discovered? If you're in school, share with your partner. If you're at home, think about what is one thing that you need to remember when you're rounding to the thousandth place. Now we're going to round to the nearest whole number. So let's check out this number, 4 and 8 tenths. The process is still the same. I got to mark my whole number. My whole number is the same as my ones place, 1 whole. So this is the place I'm trying to round to. So if I'm thinking of this, I'm kind of thinking of $4.08. Is that closer to $4 because this is the place? Or if I look back at the 8, is that going to be closer to $5? If I have $4.08 or 80 cents, am I going to stay at 4 or am I going to round to 5? Well, I look back at the 8. 8 is 5 or more. The best estimate would be 5 for a whole number. Okay? Next. Now I've got 4 and 821 thousandths. I'm going to round this time to the nearest whole number. Same place. Here's my whole number, my ones place. Underline my 4. I'm going to look back. I've got an 8 in the place before that. What does the 8 tell me? Well, if I have 8 dimes, am I going to be closer to $4 or am I going to be closer to $5? Same as before. I'm going to be closer to $5. Because I want to round to the nearest whole number, I'm going to stop with the whole number. I don't need a decimal point. I don't need any other places. The whole idea is I'm coming up with a simpler number to work with. 5 is definitely easier to count by, 5, 10, 15, than counting by 4 and 821 thousandths. Our next one. Write the number down. Mark the number that's the nearest whole number. So underline, what number would we underline in this one? Well, if we're looking for the whole number, here's our whole number. We'd have $2 and 8 pennies and 9 slivers of a penny. I need to look back at the place right next to it. I have a 0 in the tenths place. What does the tenth tell me? If I don't have any dimes, is $2 and no dimes closer to $2 or closer to $3? Well, if I have $2.08, I'm going to round it to $2. I'm only 8 cents away. I'm 92 cents away from $3. Our next example, 25 and 37 hundredths. Go ahead and write it down. Mark your whole number. Draw your arrow. What would we round this number to? Well, my whole number is my ones place, so I still want to underline my 5. So now I need to decide, am I going to stay at 25 or am I going to go up to 26? Well, to decide, I have to go back to the place right before it, which would be my 3 tenths. My 3 tenths tell me, well, 3, 4 or less. That's definitely 4 or less. I'm going to stay at 25. Because look at, if I think about that, it would be $25.37. If I wanted to round that to the nearest dollar, I'm closest to $25. 37 cents isn't more than 50 cents, so I wouldn't round up. So our learning target for today was I can round decimals to the nearest thousandth and nearest whole number. Where do you see yourself on the continuum? Hopefully, after rounding for 2 days, you're closer to a 4 or a 5. If you're not, be sure you ask your teacher for clarification, either today if you're in class or tomorrow if you're an at-home learner. Double check your Google Classroom if you're at home to see what your next thing to do is.